when you look at UFOs, people say, well, these UFOs are spheres or they're discs or they're triangles, right? That's the predominant set of shapes we see. You know why? I have a theory. Round UFOs are particle accelerators, and triangular UFOs are particle accelerators as well. And they're generating these particles. Even the shapes in our cultural history fit right in with the potential usage of these KK particles to jump into this compressed space, this compressed dimension, and literally punch out and punch in anywhere they want. Even the cultural descriptions of the UFOs work when it comes to describing a ship this way. I know Bob's story. I know George Knapp has done extensive interviews with Bob Lazar. I know Rogan's done it, yes. I'm not convinced one way or the other that he did everything he said he did. I'm not convinced, but I'm also not calling him any kind of fraud either, because I don't know enough either way. Okay, for example, before they found element 115, he was talking about it, right? Element 115 in the periodic table. Well, if you are a layperson, you say, how did he know that exists? Part of me thinks, just like with Bob Lazar, part of me thinks that Frank Corso was the real deal. And part of me thinks that maybe some of it was true, but some of it wasn't quite factual. And I've read the book so many times, in fact, that the pages have fallen out. And I got to kind of resort the pages in order to do the pages right now, because so many of them fallen out. But it was a very good book. I was riveted by it because I wanted to know if this was true. And I read it with the idea of whether it could be true. And the answer was yes, it could be true. But was it true? And, observatory buildings much of the time. And I'm also the Mutual UFO Network's chief photo and video analyst, because why not? It's a great opportunity. It's a great field, and it's opening up now like you can't believe. There's so many more people getting interested in it. So in the astronomy world, I got a degree in astronomy. That's what I went to school for, like I said. And so I spent a lot of years, working in professional observatories and, big observatories, doing work on programs and things. And then I went into computer science because computer science chugs away at numbers that tell us all about the universe. So once I got the computer science under my belt, I've migrated back to astronomy. And now I'm doing my own thing full time. And I run remote observatories around the country. So we have two right now, one here. The telescope is behind me right there. I don't know if you could see it. And that one is for the East Coast, and that's out of the building because we're working on the building. And out in Arizona, we have one out in the desert. And this one is our showpiece. We show people beautiful night sky on a nightly basis when it's clear, probably tonight even. And that's Sky Tour live stream. It's a streaming service that we've come up with, and we have lots of people that come in from all over the world. I have someone from Bulgaria who comes in. I don't have anyone from Belgium yet, so maybe you're the first. Right? Really interesting. So that's what I do, and my job, in my view, is to bring science to people who might normally not think about it, and make it understandable to those who might think they can't understand it. And that's my forte. That's my strength, is that I can explain the complex in a much more down-to-earth way. So, because science is for everybody.
Very interesting. Maybe quickly, can you tell me about your FX models also? I think it would be interesting to hear about it.
Yeah, sure. FX Models is a company I started to help pay the bills way back in the 90s. And I ended up doing a lot of work for the Navy. I still do. And defense contractors, I still do that too. And so I build a lot of submarine models. anything under the water surface, that's my strength. So in astronomy, it's outer space, and with the other business, it's inner space, below the waves. And here, not so much, you know. So it's inner space or outer space, and so FX Models has been going strong since 1995, you know, and we build submarines of all kinds, even working ones, as models. And so we have submarine models that are only just a few inches long that actually have what are called ballast tanks in them. They dive and surface using compressed air, the whole 9 yards. Uh, and that's part of a radio control uh, submarine industry that's out there. And we do that very, very little now. We actually make more display models for defense contractors in the Navy.
Great. So maybe I'll ask you first, how did you get interested in UFOs? I think that's the first question for you before going to unidentified submerged objects. I think that's very interesting also. But how did you get interested in UFO first?
Well, see, as a kid, I would look up at the sky and I would look at the stars and I'd say, and this is before I knew much about the stars. I knew, of course, that there were other suns, basically. And I would look up there and I would say, boy, I'm sure there's life around some of those other stars too. There's got to be. I mean, look at this planet. I compared life on Earth to what could be out there. And like every human has two arms and two legs, and they're split down the middle symmetrically on either side. I didn't know what to call that as a kid, but now I know it's called bilateral symmetry. And that's based on most likely the way DNA in our systems replicates and makes copies of itself. And that DNA, I figured, is in every animal on the planet. Every creature on the planet has DNA. So, and as a kid, I was 9 actually. And I said, I'll bet this DNA thing is all throughout the universe. I bet it's something that the universe makes. And I was wrong about that. The universe doesn't make it, but planets make it. Okay. And I hadn't put that together as a 9-year-old kid at that point. But I had to have a big surgery when I was age 9. And when I got out of the hospital, I couldn't do anything. They had to make me stay in the house. I had to sit down, not exercise much because I was healing. So what did I do as a 9-year-old? I did what any 9-year-old would do. I designed a space station. I drew up on notebook paper. I started drawing up this plan for a space station, and I decided I'm going to send it to NASA. And I did. I shipped it off to NASA in a manila folder, and I sat there at the mailbox every day waiting for them to reply and say, "We took your idea. You're going to be a phenomenal person." That never came, but what did come was a big box, and it was from NASA. I was like, "Wow, this is cool." And I opened it up, and it was full of model kits, books, pamphlets on almost every single program NASA was doing at that time. And it had cloth mission patches, the round patches for like the early Apollo, everything. It was really incredible. And I was like, I'm gonna label this. So I got a black magic marker from my mother and I labeled it Space Box because it was all about space. So this box was mine. And then, I thought it was giant when I was a kid. It was actually smaller, but it was pretty big. So there was a envelope in there, and it had my space station plan in it, and there was a letter from a scientist at NASA. Wow, Mom, a scientist wrote me. I could care less about the models. I love making models, okay, but the scientist wrote me, and so I read this letter, and he said, "You are fantastically gifted. Think about going into the space program." Back then they called it the manned space program, you know, but human endeavors in space flight have been something I've always kind of leaned into a little bit. I was always very, very into that because I know that out there is where we're going to go at some point, right? So as it turns out, this scientist uh, had really sparked the interest in a little kid, a 9-year-old kid. And I credit him with getting me into astronomy because it was shortly after that when I realized I'm going to get into astronomy. I'm going to become an astronomer, whatever that is. I'm going to study the sky. And it was probably 40 years later when I contacted him again, this time as an astronomer. And I said, uh, I contacted you when I was 9 years old. And because of what you did and shared with me, um, I decided to become an astronomer. And he wrote back saying, wow, that's incredible. I never, I don't remember, of course, but that's fantastic. Well, his name was Gentry Lee. Now, Gentry Lee is the head of all robotic missions to the outer solar system for JPL. And that's the guy that looked at my space station plan when he was just a NASA scientist. So that's a great story.
And I'm curious from your experience, why we don't have evidence for UFO or what you call also unidentified submerged object. Let's start with UFO first, and then
Yeah.
USO. And just
Hmm.
tell me why do you believe, since you said you believe there's maybe, just first start, why do you believe there's maybe aliens in if it's related to UFO, or it's not the case, or why do you believe such something like that?
But those are all good questions. And here's where I usually go with that. Um, we look at our planet and we look at how our planet developed in our solar system, and we look out into space with the Kepler Space Telescope, with the James Webb Space Telescope now, and we're finding planets that are in the zone that's habitable around stars. We're finding many planets that are in the habitable zones of their stars, and um, we now know that there's more planets in the universe than there are stars. That's a huge thing to comprehend and think about, because if there's more planets than stars, it means there's more chances of life of some kind. Now, we're looking for microbial life on Mars, and we think there could be life of some type underneath Europa's icy mantle in the slush ocean beneath those ice caps. So, if that's the case right here in our solar system, certainly other planets could have some type of extreme forms of life at the very least, right? I mean, down in Antarctica, more than a mile underground is Lake Vostok. And in Lake Vostok, there's 3,500 different types of species in there. Never seen the light of day. They're more than 2 miles down under the ice in Antarctica. Sorry, gone for however many thousands, hundreds of thousands of years from the light of day. And they have this self-sustaining ecosystem of life, tiny little private oasis down there that supports several thousand different species. Now, that plus the fact that we dive in the deep ocean and we find that the deep ocean has these sulfide chimneys, these vents called black smokers, okay, colloquially. And these sulfide vents emit this very, very hot water, sometimes over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, and this water coming out laden with all kinds of minerals that a particular type of bacteria really likes to eat. Well, that bacteria is also lovingly eaten by filter feeders that live around those vents. And it's a cascading domino effect of dependency. Okay, the bacteria depends on the mineral water. The tube worms depend on the bacteria. The clams depend on the bacteria. The tiny little crabs depend on the clams and the tube worms. And it's a cascading bunch of life. So even here we have extreme forms of life. And because we saw these forms of life deep in Antarctica's Lake Vostok, and because we find life deep at these hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the Pacific, we figured if it can be here, it could certainly be in other worlds in our solar system. And those are called extremophiles, the ones that live in the very hot or very cold conditions. In fact, they love those conditions. So Europa around Jupiter is a target, Enceladus around Saturn is a target. Titan around Saturn is also a target for possibility. Mars is a target. So if it's possible that we can find life of some kind around these other worlds, then it's probably possible that there'll be life like that at the very least around other stars around the universe. Now, Look at all the rest of the life beyond microbial. Now you've got fish, tiny little crustaceans and people, right? What about life like that? Much more complex life. Well, we know it took over 4 billion years to develop here on our planet, and the universe has nothing but time on its hands. So I'm sure that life could develop like us in some way, maybe even intelligent life elsewhere. And I'm not the only astronomer that thinks that either. You know, so I believe that aliens exist.
Okay, maybe the next question about where's the evidence? I think the thing is, maybe that's what I saw even in your community. It's kind of like ridicule, like, okay, we fed up with these thoughts. We still need an evidence. I tend to agree with that. Just like it's now more than 50 years and there's nothing, or maybe it's secret, like saying that as we spoke before, like there's no much information about where this material come from, or this vehicles or reverse engineering. And where do you see this? Yeah, it just there is no evidence yet. Why there is no evidence?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And Enrico Fermi, the Fermi paradox. Uh, you may remember the Fermi paradox. He asked the question when he was talking to his nuclear scientist buddies over lunch at one point. He basically said, "Where are they?" Well, uh, that actually was wrongly attributed to Enrico Fermi, but that's okay. It got his name on it. We'll call it the Fermi paradox. Where are they? If they're here, if they're out there, then why aren't they here? Is the question I get all the time. And the response I usually give is because we are at a technological level that's here, and they're at a technological level that's up here. They're not going to expose themselves to what's down below because what's down below can hurt them. Now you might say, well, that doesn't sound right. I mean, they're advanced species. Yes, they are. But so are we compared to ants. But if you kick the wrong ant hill, then those ants can come out and sting you enough times to kill you. Okay? You're not going to walk into a herd of elk, big, strong, hulking elk, and say, excuse me, I got to put this radio collar around your neck there. Hold still, Phil, or whatever. You're not going to do that because they will kill you. And unfortunately, that's something that an alien species would know and they'd want to avoid. They would not want to come and get in touch with us. As far as evidence goes, though, um, an advanced species might not have any evidence that it leaves behind, but there is lots of evidence for it, actually. We have submarine navies all over the world that, when they're out there patrolling the seas, they see things. They sense and their sonars, they pick up things. There's a lot of reports from many navies about unknown submerged objects, the ones we talked about earlier, you said. But for UFOs, there's a ton of data out there, a ton of artifacts, a ton of evidence that is seen by people. And as MUFON's chief photo analyst, I'm very, very hard on the data. Very hard on the data. And just today, I saw a video of a UFO taken by a U.S. drone over Iraq looking down at the ground, and this spherical object flew through. Now, if that was in the United States, I would say that was a mylar balloon because it looked like a mylar balloon, sort of, but not really. It was too perfectly round. But this is in Iraq. And as far as having mylar balloons in Iraq, I don't know how many mylar balloons there are in Iraq and how many people might have one of those party balloons in Iraq. Maybe there are, but I don't know that yet. So that keeps this video very intriguing for me. Okay. So that's the kind of evidence we see as well. Now, the other evidence is technological evidence. How do I begin this? There's a number of ways in which a unidentified object, a craft from another world, can use technology to get here from there. It's a vast universe, obviously. So it's that gigantic distance that makes people say, how could they possibly be here? Well, they can. And I lecture on this. In fact, that's my lecture at Contact in the Desert coming up. I lecture on the in layman's terms how a certain technology that's related to a theory we have of the universe called string theory can be leveraged by an advanced civilization to actually get here from there in a very short time. It's not the warp drive thing, not the Alcubierre drive, which you may have heard about, which is a warp drive where they warp space, then they unfold it. It's not that at all. It's very different. It's dimensional travel. Now, there's a certain variation of string theory. It's called RS1. That's the designations, And in RS1, we have our X, Y, and Z movement through time, right? Our 4 dimensions, X, Y, and Z, and time is also a dimension. And we live on that universe, right? That's our universe, and that's all here. But there's a 5th dimension down here that is right next to us. That if we can go from here into here, the benefit of being here is that the whole universe is compressed around you. Everything is condensed. Everything is smaller. Distances are shorter. So that would give you the opportunity to use a technology to say, punch out of our 4 dimensions, go into this 5th dimension, and then punch in anywhere else you want to go at will. And that means you can eat up tons of light years in a very short time and go distant places. And I'm not the only one that thinks about this, actually. There's a guy, my good friend, Bob Schroeder, he wrote the book Solving the UFO Enigma. This was a theory he had. And when I read his work, I realized, wow, Bob, you're onto something. And so I started championing and looking into it and saw that this was something very possible. So technologically, what would you see? If this technology was in play? Well, one of the byproducts is that your UFO, all right, would look like it's shimmering. We get reports of that all the time. It would look like it's changing colors. We get reports of that all the time. It would look like it's vanishing from here and suddenly reappearing over here. We get reports of that all the time too. So is that hard evidence? No, because all 3 of those things I could tell you there are reasons from human anatomy, okay, to astronomical reasons why you see things that way in the sky. However, we can't discount the fact that it could be that we're watching an advanced technology at play right here in our local space.
Maybe a quick question. If they are advanced,
Yeah.
like I said, why do you think they bother to just to visit some civilization who are less developed? What is the blame of that?
I get that question a lot, and I have it's a fundamentally sound answer. I mentioned before how we're bilaterally symmetric. We're the same on the left and the right. That's a consequence of what we're made of. What we're made of are carbon atoms. We're a carbon-based species. Carbon is the 4th most abundant element in the whole universe. Oxygen is the 3rd. And then you have helium is the 2nd most abundant, and hydrogen is the 1st. So oxygen and carbon are the 3rd and 4th most abundant. So it stands to reason that a very flexible atom like the carbon atom is probably going to form the basis for life in countless locations. So in order to have carbon-based life, you need oxygen. All right. Oxygen provides the energy and the means by which you can create all kinds of catalyzing reactions. You can get your biological processes to be sustained, etc., etc. Now, if you're an alien species looking for another world like your own, and if you're carbon-based, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to see a carbon-based life form 10 light years away. But you know what you will see? You'll see oxygen in their atmosphere. That's the telltale sign. And the amount of oxygen we have in our atmosphere doesn't change over time. Not by much. It kind of does this. The reason that that's important is because oxygen doesn't like to be in an atmosphere. It's a very, very, very powerful atom that will bond with anything. As soon as it can bond, it will. So on Mars, for instance, there was a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere, and the water molecules that contained it were broken apart by the ultraviolet radiation hitting Mars, and those oxygen molecules and oxygen, the O2 molecule went down into the ground where it began to bond with iron compounds, and it made Fe2O3. So that means that's rust. Iron and oxygen bond to make rust. That's why Mars is red. It rusted. It's the rusty planet. Okay, so you think about that. You see that oxygen leaves an atmosphere very quickly after it becomes free. So if the oxygen comes in a burst and then no more, it'll all be gone in just a few 100,000 to a million or 2 years. Here on Earth, it's been here for the entire existence of our planet, starting about 2.5 billion years ago. So that's a signal to any extraterrestrial civilization watching Earth. Look at the amount of oxygen in that atmosphere. There has to be life there. That can't be just geologic processes causing oxygen, which it can, okay, but not at that level, not at that extent. So oxygen in the atmosphere is like a bright blue beacon in the universe, shining out saying, we're here, life is here. Stephen Hawking said, if you remember, Stephen Hawking once said, we should keep our heads down and hide. We don't want people to see us. We don't want the aliens to know we're here, okay, because we're not ready for this contact. So we should just sort of stay out of the limelight. Too late. We've been announcing our presence as a living planet for 2.5 billion years. So anyone within 2.5 billion light years from us, which goes out well beyond every single galaxy that is in our group of galaxies that we call the local group, and all the way to beyond galaxies in the Virgo cluster, which is the nearest big supercluster to us, and far beyond. The signal from this planet has been going out there saying there's oxygen in this atmosphere, and all you need to find it is technology. By the way, technology like the James Webb Space Telescope. And we're only a few thousand years into our written language, going back to ancient Sumeria. So if you had a civilization that's 10,000 years into their language development, I suspect they would have a way to see oxygen in an atmosphere at a far more efficient and better way than we can. So we can't hide. So we are a beacon. And you can imagine that anyone who's carbon based is going to come here because, hey, this is another planet like ours. Like, let's go there. And one other thing is that if you can learn about the universe, I think, by looking at life on our planet. All right. You look at all the many, many species of life on our world, from the not so complex multicellular organisms all the way up to the most advanced are us. Every one of those life forms has a certain characteristic that they're imbued with. Every one of them. And that's curiosity. When a dog smells something, they walk over and they sniff. Why do they do that? They're not just looking for a meal. They're curious about what that smell is. It may not be a smell of something they want to eat. Same thing for other creatures on the planet. They're curious. And that curiosity is something that I think is built in, a universal template. And so any creatures on the planet that want to, or any creatures on their planet elsewhere that are interested in their planet are going to be curious too and say, what's behind those points of light up there in the sky? Just like the ancient Babylonians did here. And then the ancient Greeks after them. And so we found that now we have a potentially curious universe. And curiosity breeds exploration. Exploration breeds contact. And contact breeds, well, we'll see, won't we? Yeah, no, I know that every country has their what they call their black projects, the projects that no one can see. Um, we have them. Russia has them. China has them. Other countries have them. Um, but um, we've never seen, for instance, an object that can move underwater at several hundred knots, which is like several hundred miles an hour. Okay. Nothing can go that fast underwater that we have ever made as a human race, not as Americans, not as Belgians, not as Russians, not as British. No human country on this planet of any kind has ever created an object that can move that fast underwater. It's physically impossible and be nearly silent. The only way you can do it, incidentally, is if you do this warping thing I was telling you about, where you have the four dimensions that we're in, and then we have the fifth dimension. Well, the way it works is any craft you have is going to kind of bounce between these areas. They're going to bounce in and out. So they're neither here nor there. They're kind of always in between. And that would give them the opportunity to travel at any speed they wanted to underwater and not feel the water there, but still be kind of visible, right? And mostly not visible. See, so it's all adding up. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is over there in Geneva, okay, in Switzerland, they have CERN, right? The nuclear particle accelerator laboratory. Well, they're building another laboratory, another accelerator, because they're going to investigate a certain type of particle. The particle that I'm talking about is the one that can actually take you out of these four dimensions and move you into the fifth dimension. Okay, that's called a Kaluza-Klein particle, and they're investigating these KK particles because they're finding some really interesting properties about these particles. What do you think those properties are? I mean, it's probably yeah.
The fifth
Go
dimension,
ahead.
because you said at the beginning, what is the fifth dimension? Can you elaborate more about the fifth dimension?
Yeah. Okay, we have X, Y, and Z moving through time, right? You know, lateral movement, up and down movement, and out and in movement. Okay, X, Y, and Z, but it changes through time. Those are four dimensions. The fifth dimension is another space that is not one of these four, and it's out here. It's actually in the real world and in the real math, it's coincident with ours, but that makes people's heads blow up. So if you think of it as a separate place, okay, if you can get into that, it's highly warped. And there's another dimension further out called the Planck dimension out here. But this dimension here has a special name. It's called the bulk. That's spelled BULK. Now, that bulk dimension right there is so highly warped that if you take those KK particles I was just telling you about and you circle your ship with them really rapidly, then those particles live here. They don't live out here, they live here. And if your ship gets dragged into this, well, then as a consequence, the universe is shrinking around you. And all distances to everything else get very small. The farther in you go, the deeper the warp and the closer objects are. If you go in a little bit, then you could go to Alpha Centauri maybe in 20 minutes as opposed to, uh, say, the 15 seconds it might take. So the farther in you go, the smaller the dimensions, the smaller the distances become. So that fifth dimension is what I'm talking about there.
Is it possible for to prove that? Like, I'm just curious, like a human, as a human, can we do that? Oh, that's not possible physically for our bodies.
Well, it's not possible for us to prove it yet, but it is possible to theorize it, and it's been done. And because those KK particles I'm talking about are gravitons. Now, we know about the fundamental four particles. We have the weak, strong force, we have the electromagnetic force, and gravity. Those are the four fundamental forces in quantum mechanics, right? Our understanding of the atom. Well, it's the gravitational force that we have the problems with, because every one of those other forces, we can see them as particles, and we can describe them also as waves. Light is dual nature. It's a light wave and it's a photon, which is a particle effectively of light, right? So we don't have that with gravity. We know we have gravity waves. We've seen them multiple times, all right? However, in fact, one of the detectors is right near you in Italy, actually, over in Italy, okay, that detect these things. And those gravitational waves are probably associated also with these gravitational particles called gravitons. And we don't see those yet. Probably because they live here, like we're talking about. They live off of our four dimensions where we spend all our time looking, right? But in CERN, at CERN, they're going to start looking here. Okay. Now, this is a theory that's based on a variation of that string theory I told you about. It's called RS1, which stands for Randall Sundrum 1. And that particular variation of string theory is the variant that actually shows us how this fifth dimension works with regard to our other four dimensions. So it's like, you can use your hand to describe it. This is where we live and this is where we want to go. That's why it's a different location, right? It's coincident, right? It could be this way, but we look at it, think of it this way: X, Y, and Z moving through time, and then this compressed dimension over here where you can go in and all the distances are shortened. And can we do it? Yeah, we can, because if we shroud our craft with these particles I'm talking about, that we can generate, by the way, with just a simple fusion reactor, which Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in California has actually just made great strides in doing, because they started a fusion reaction that was continuous, and they had to stop it. They shut it down. So they had a continuous fusion reaction going. First time ever. That's important. So now if you have one of those in your ship, then you can generate these particles I'm talking about. And as long as they shield your ship, they shield you. Okay. And the interesting thing is, when you look at UFOs, people say, well, these UFOs are spheres, or they're discs, or they're triangles, right? That's the predominant set of shapes we see. You know why? I have a theory. Round UFOs are particle accelerators, and triangular UFOs are particle accelerators as well. And they're generating these particles. Even the shapes in our cultural history fit right in with the potential usage of these KK particles to jump into this compressed space, this compressed dimension, and literally punch out and punch in anywhere they want. Even the cultural descriptions of the UFOs work when it comes to describing a ship this way. I think it's pretty cool.
It's pretty impressive. I appreciate mentioning the shape part, because I think that's very, very relevant. Um, Maybe quick question also, since you believe in maybe aliens, civilization, maybe doing that. Maybe the first question, because I think ask this to Jack Villay about the religion, and maybe that's something I also saw people speak about. If that's true, did it make that the religion doesn't make sense in that case, since it's never mentioned any like advanced civilization beyond Earth? I don't know if you can answer this question.
Well, yeah, it's not a it's a question that merits investigation for sure. Does it mean that religion doesn't matter anymore? No, it certainly doesn't. Okay, because you'll have a group of people that say, "Well, religion grew out of people seeing magical beings in the past and worshiping them." And reproducing them on their cave walls and so forth. And there'll be one group that's going to say, yeah, these were aliens visiting us many, many, centuries ago. You can get that. And people will say, oh, look at that. Thousands of years ago, we had aliens visit and they became our gods. That'll be one train of thought. The other will be, well, this doesn't negate any religion whatsoever. It just means that each planet might have its own religion, and that life is not constrained to humans. Life is constrained to the universe. So if you're a gray alien with big black eyes, maybe you're just as uh, um, religious as humans, but your gods might be different. Maybe you don't have access to them. Maybe you don't know what they look like, but you make them in your own image, just like we did. You know, the people here, they made Jesus a guy with long hair, okay, and some make him a man that's more Ethiopian, okay, and what do we know for sure? We don't, right? We don't even know for our own. So, you know, who are we to say that another race of being will have anything, more or less important to talk about when it comes to like a religion? Um, I think that they'll have their take on it, and we have our take on it. We could both be right.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
So, do you believe there's a lizard people or not? Lizard people.
well, that's interesting because I never used to, and I thought that was kind of silly. And I said, "I'll stop with the reptilian garbage." I would say, but then I started doing research and thinking, okay, the most common type of star in the universe are these small red stars. They're called M class stars, and they're very small. They're about a hundredth the size of our sun, and they put out roughly a hundredth the amount of radiation. And any planet going around these stars is going to have one side always facing it, like the moon faces us. Why is that? Because any planet that is in a habitable zone around this star, one of these small stars, is going to be really close to the star because it puts out so much less radiation. And because it puts out so much less, the planets have to be closer if they're going to be in a habitable zone, okay, where you can have liquid water on the surface and an atmosphere that's not scalding. And those planets will, by the very nature of being close to the planet, close to the star, are going to be tidally locked. They're not going to be able to rotate on their axes. They're going to be locked. So you're always going to have a perpetual daylight side. You're going to always have a sunset side, and you're always going to have a starry side. Okay. The other thing is, as you're going around this star on one of these small planets, I'm gonna I'll get to this in a second. What you're talking about. Okay. As you're going around this star, your entire year could be 5 days long, and we see that. We see that some planets that are in the habitable zone of these small red stars, they go around the star in 5 days, or 7 days, or 9 days. That's their year. Okay, that's how small the stars are. So that said, what would an alien species look like if it develops on a planet like that? It's always got one side facing. Well, there's several ways to look at this. If they develop on the dark side of the planet, okay, then, which they could, then they're going to have excessively capable night vision, or maybe big black eyes. Okay. And because they're always in the dark, they may not develop pigmentation in their skin, so they might be gray. Just like we see with cave species here on our planet, okay, that live in caves permanently. So now, okay, that explains like the gray alien. But now let's go a step further. On this planet, everything that made you what you are, that got us to this particular place where we are like this, we have this shape, this skin, blah, blah, okay, all that happened because of 5 major extinction events that occurred on our planet. And we had 5. Okay, 3 of them were what we call biodiversity failures, where species stopped diversifying and spreading out radiatively for whatever reason, environmental pressures, something like that. Don't know. And but two of them were from potential bad impacts. Okay, or uh, and so on. So the bottom line is, had 65 million years ago, what would have happened if dinosaurs were not ultimately obliterated by an asteroid strike? Well, at the time, there was one particular dinosaur called a Troodon, all right, that was actually developing a bigger crankcase, a bigger brain capacity. Now, we equate surface area of the brain with capability to do reasoned thinking. Well, this dinosaur was developing it, and of course, his existence and his whole line of evolution was cut short. So, what would have happened? And I've speculated this around the world, and when I talk, what would have happened if dinosaurs didn't go extinct here? Would we exist? right? If we exist, what would we look like? Is it possible that we would be intelligent dinosaurs? Now, intelligence is not a foregone conclusion. It's a long journey. We see that in our evolution. Um, you know, the chimpanzee is no nearly as intelligent as we are, but it's been around for about as long as we have. Okay, so why is it that Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, okay, why did Lucy, diminutive 4 foot tall being, why did Lucy form a linchpin and make its way um, to bring about other species that led to Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us? See, how did that happen? Well, that's a tough one. We don't have all the answers, do we? Now, Lucy was bipedal. She walked on 2 feet, right? She didn't walk on all fours. That's huge because that allows them to see more, gauge threats better, grab food that's at a higher location, climb. And the opposable thumb was very important too for grabbing things. You can't really grab stuff if you just do this too well. You can't really do too much with that. All right. So all these little developments led to us by chance becoming an intelligent species. And we're the only one that has a level of intelligence that we have on this planet. Dolphins have a brain almost as big as ours, actually a little bigger. So why didn't they become intelligent? Because it's not about brain size. It's about environmental pressures. It's about changes in the environment that make them react. Dolphins didn't have to evolve to learn how to speak language and create science. Now, what if they did? Well, they're in the water and they've stayed in the water. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that you're limited by being underwater all the time. Your eyes are different. Your form has to be sleek so you can survive underwater. You have to be a fast swimmer. We don't because we moved on to land, as did some fish. Okay, so we migrated onto land, and dolphins didn't. And we ended up having a lot more pressures to deal with. We had a changing environment. We had to work out how we were going to cook food. You can't light a fire underwater, all right? But still, that's a silly one because, that's just a pressure that we had. Yes, we would eat raw food when we were, in the early days, I would say. But um, I would like to know, for instance, who the first person was to figure out that, hey, we got to put fire on this. All right. We have to put fire on this in order to eat and make sure we don't get sick. I wonder who that one was. I'm guessing it actually happened during a forest fire. They came across a carcass, and probably still burning, and they took pieces off and started eating it. It's like, hey, this ain't bad. And it could be that simple, but it's universal, right? So, so the reptilians would have developed, for instance, out of on a planet where the major extinctions of a dinosaur type species never occurred. And we're assuming dinosaurs would develop. Well, look at how it happened here. Look at the amounts of oxygen in our atmosphere back in the Permian period. There's tons of oxygen. And that led to bigger animals and so forth. But another planet would have to go through a similar evolution in order to reach a similar result. That's why if we ever do find extraterrestrial life that's intelligent, it will in no way look like us. It's not Star Trek.
Maybe the most important question, at least I want to ask you, since you formulated that these objects, either in the sky or in oceans, that we don't know the origin of it, why bother this obsession? If we already say that they are advanced, and I think there's also evidence from old ages and the drawing that there's alien species or craft. So what's the point if they're already coming and just, I don't know, seeing what we do, like the reason you mentioned? And why there is obsession, and since we need to know the truth, we need to know what is happening. Where would this lead to us? We have already enough problems in our life, so that, like, people, why we should bother with that if they already coming and see? And it's hard even to get a hard evidence, even though you
So
you convinced me. Yeah,
are you saying why would we bother to look for them, or why would they bother to come look for us?
I think you've answered the second part in your conversation, why they are
Okay.
bothered. But I think why are the
So
human obsessed or bothered with that? Since
no.
it seems that we don't have, I don't know, way of communication, or people just say we have our own problem in life and why we should look for aliens in this moment.
Well, if you go back thousands of years, there have been drawings on cave walls of strange objects, right? So clearly, humans saw something that they couldn't explain. They they put it on a wall. They drew a picture. They scratched it into rock and on a petroglyph. Um, Now, I did a lecture, done that in a number of places in the United States, where I discovered that all over the world, among peoples that never talked to each other thousands of years ago, they all represent their deities, their gods, with halos around their heads. Way, what's that? Why would they put halos around the heads? The Wandjina in Australia, the Kimberley region, the Aboriginal people, they would draw these pictures of their creatures that they said came from the sky, lived under the water, and had full mastery of the water. And they had halos around their heads. The Wandjina. Okay. Valcamonica in Italy, the aliens, warriors, had helmets, on their heads, looked like halos, right? India, there were creatures that actually, in the cave drawings, the pictographs in the caves, had halos around their heads. The Renaissance painters all showed our gods and Jesus with halos around their heads. All right. And in fact, in many of those Renaissance paintings, you can't miss disc shaped craft in some of them that they're even pointing at in some cases. What does all that mean? It means to me that this was a phenomenon that was probably seen and then they reproduced it and recorded it, right? So why do we bother? I think it goes back to the fact that we know that at some point looking forward, this planet is going to be destroyed. Not necessarily by an asteroid, but by the sun. When the sun runs out of hydrogen, the sun's going to swell up into a red giant ball. We see it all over the universe. We know it's happening at some point. We have about 5 billion years. So don't pack your bags. Okay. But it means that, it means that we will eventually, as a race of beings on a world in the Sol system, our sun's name is Sol, SOL, we're going to have to leave here and go to another world. So we're looking for other worlds, not to leave tomorrow or 1,000 years from now, but because, number one, we're curious to know if there's more life than us out there, because it's an awful feeling thinking that you're alone. And no one wants to be alone, either as a group of humans that don't want to be alone in the universe or a singular person who doesn't have a friend. That's awful. and I look at it, that we tend to reach out. We do that. Every single mission to Mars we have ever launched has as part of its repertoire of experiments an experiment to look for evidence of past or present life on Mars. It's a curiosity thing. We're trying to figure out the universe, and so we're going to look for other life. And I think that alien species are doing the same thing, especially because they can see with their advanced systems, they can see that there's an oxygen envelope around this planet. So we're doing the same thing. We're looking out too. We're just more primitive. We can't really get out there yet.
That's fascinating. Maybe since we constantly have a question, maybe the first thing, what does it take for us so that we can maybe catch with this technology? Where do you think? Because I think, for example,
Just
Avi for example, he's trying to make some effort, and I think he faces a lot of criticism. We had him in a podcast, and
yeah, the
he's
Galileo
expressed,
project.
yeah, and he
Yep,
expressed that he's,
I've talked to Avi.
yeah,
Yeah, we're friends. I know Avi, and
okay,
his Galileo project. I've talked to his team, and hopefully they'll. I'm hopeful that they'll use me because I've figured out ways to remotely control whole buildings with instrumentation from here in the northeastern United States when it's out in the western United States. So I can do it, you know, easily enough. So hopefully they'll use me for that. So he's come under criticism for Galileo, the project to determine this. But isn't that what a scientist should do? Is try to find answers that might not be palatable to a lot of people. You may not like the answer, but you darn well want to know that you got the answer. You know, and if you and see, there's a thing about science too. A scientist is willing to be wrong. Okay, Avi Loeb isn't going into this thinking, uh, "I'm right. I know there's aliens out there." He's going in it saying, I believe there could be aliens out there. And we would be doing a disservice to those that follow generations after us not to look for them. We should look for them at the very least. If they're here, we should try to locate them and see if we can find them because we owe it to science. You know, there's enough stories out there that make it impossible to believe for me that it's all fictional and all made up. I just don't see it. So I think Avi's on the right track. And I'll be talking to their team again.
maybe a quick question also, because I think that's something I would love to ask you. Ask Jack Valisa's question about Bob Lazar's story, and he didn't want to answer. Um, are commenting, and I understand maybe, but I'm curious from point of view, what do you think about him?
Yeah, yeah. I know that. I know Bob. I don't know him, but I know Bob's story. I know George Knapp has done extensive interviews with Bob Lazar. I know Rogan's done it, yes, but I'm not convinced one way or the other that he did everything he said he did. Um, I'm not. I'm not convinced, but I'm also not calling him any kind of fraud either, because I don't know enough either way. Okay, for example, before they found element 115, he was talking about it, right? Element 115 in the periodic table. Well, if you are a layperson, you say, how did he know that exists? Well, as a guy who's an astronomer, I know that you could have up to about 118 elements before the strong nuclear force, those are the four fundamental forces I talked about, can't hold that nucleus together anymore and they'll start drifting apart. So if you say there's 115 and it's not there yet, it certainly will be at some point, okay, because we just haven't found it yet or created it yet or done whatever. So you'll be able to theoretically determine how many protons you can have in your nucleus, okay, because that's the number in the periodic table, 115 protons in the nucleus of the atom. Well, you can theorize up to about 118, beyond which the atom would really fall apart. You couldn't hold those outer protons in. So it's not like he was saying some miraculous element in this case that he got to work with. He could have just done the theoretical calculation saying, well, there should be an element 115, right? So if you were someone that wanted to try to make him into a fraud, which I am not, you would say, well, you could have just known that, you could obviously have an element 115 and you just kind of waited around until somebody found it. And that's possible. So because it's a possibility, we have to be cautious. And that's all I'm saying. You know, I like his story. It's actually a very exciting story to listen to Bob Lazar talk about this stuff. And I dearly love it all to be true. I really would. And maybe it is. But again, I can't say one way or the other, you know. But for the reason I said, no, I don't. I don't think it's fictitious. I think that, as I said, I don't say yes or no. I'm in the middle. I'm not going to say he's faking it, he's true, because there's evidence to indicate he could be faking. There's evidence to indicate he could be telling the truth. So, as a science guy, I stay right in the middle until more evidence comes out saying one way or the other. That's all.
But about the pressure to release some like classified data or something like that, where do you think do you think, for example, just if you're holding some information, why from the public? Why do you think do you believe there's important information related to UFO or vehicles or USO? Do you believe there is? And why you think it's still keep secret or classified or that kind of nature?
Oh yeah, see that's just straight politics, that's countries wanting power. It really comes down to that. I've worked for the Navy for many years, okay, and I'm familiar with that world, having lived in it in a way for quite a long time. And I know how the United States is with secrets. Okay, if it's something that could benefit us, they're not going to go public with it and share it with any other countries. So there is stuff that they're going to keep secret, and it's unfortunate because it means that there's a lot of stuff out there that could probably benefit humanity, and they're not going to part with it. Yet, if you look now at what the government's doing, the government's done two things. Number one, they don't use the word UFO, do they? They use UAP. Why? The reason is because UFO, you say anything about UFOs and you got to get a tinfoil hat and you're labeled a kook, right? So they developed UAP. Why? So they could write the narrative. They could create what they want the definition to be. They don't have to fight a previous definition. UAP now means unknown aerial phenomenon. Ooh. Well, it's an unidentified flying object. Don't say that. You have to get a tinfoil hat. It's an unknown aerial phenomenon. Got me? Oh, yeah, okay. So UAP is the new term, and the government coined it, and I'm glad they did, because it's time to take this into the serious realm. Because when you have a Harvard tenured astrophysicist who runs the astrophysics department at Harvard, when he comes online and says, I think this is a strong possibility that these creatures are out there, that these beings are there. You could either label him a nutcase, or you can say, tell me more, Avi. And luckily, there are more people asking him to tell them more than those calling him a nutcase. It's all the people in academia, all the people that don't want to believe it, that don't open themselves to the possibility that it could be true. It's all those people that you end up hearing from in the news media because they get you the story. Oh, this scientist here thinks Avi Loeb's a nutcase. Huh. What about all the thousands, hundreds of thousands that think he's not? Oh, they're no fun. The guy that thinks he's a nutcase, that's news. We can sell that. We'll get ratings. So it's all about news cycle, ratings, and so forth, right? Hmm. Good question. Good question. For instance, like SpaceX, for instance, I don't think they have anything they're holding. I actually don't think NASA has anything either. And you know, I kind of laugh when people say, yeah, NASA's hiding this. NASA's not letting you see the space station. NASA cut the feed right when this object appeared. Yeah, no. What they don't understand is that it's not just NASA controlling the feeds. Okay, Russia sees the feeds. Japanese see the feeds. Okay, America sees the feeds, and at other times other countries see the feeds as well. So if NASA cuts the feed, doesn't mean all the feeds go down. Okay, it just means that our feed, our ground station that was supposed to receive the signal from the International Space Station, couldn't see it, and so it momentarily goes blue. Blue is a typical color you see. So, um, but everybody likes to turn a good conspiracy, right? They want to turn it into a conspiracy. They cut the feed. Something must have happened. And then you'll always find someone who comes along and says, I bet I know what it was. And then they'll say something that makes no sense or have no evidence for. And the next thing you know, that's the fact. You're hearing it as a fact, not just a thought. I think this is what it was. And it was, I know what it was. And it was this. And that's the stages of a rumor, right? You say, I think this. And that becomes, I am sure that's what it was, to I know that's what it was. It's like, wow. No evidence, and still people jump to these crazy conclusions.
Interesting. Maybe the last question for you. Hypothetically, if we have like, assuming we have the alien civilization here and we have a contact with human here, what do you think was be able to change? Like I'm curious. Like two different species and
Communication between us and an alien species.
yes, yes. Like giving us advanced
Well,
technology. That's something one of the series, but I'm not sure if that's maybe that's not true. But yeah,
well, Frank Corso wrote a book, called The Day After Roswell, and in it he talks about. If you have the book, but for the people who listen, um, in his book he talks about how he was entrusted with these alien artifacts, and he seeded these alien artifacts to different companies to make things like Kevlar and the integrated circuit chip and things like that. And you have to say, well, is that, yeah, I did. And, is that true? Is that true or not? And if he's writing a book, he's trying to make money. So right away, you wonder, right? But um, and if he really was working on this little shoebox full of strange contraptions that he called his nut file, okay, if he really was working on stuff like that, then you have to wonder um, who gave it to him and what his mission was, and why would he come out and talk about it in later life? Stuff like that would always remain well above top secret, and he would have gone to jail for saying any of it. So why didn't he go to jail? Um, you could say, well, if they put him in jail, then they would know he was telling the truth. Well, you could always say that he was telling lies about the United States and causing international incidents by making Russia feel like we're leapfrogging with special technology that they didn't have. Well, that's something too that you have to think about. And so part of me thinks, just like with Bob Lazar, part of me thinks that Frank Corso was the real deal. And part of me thinks that maybe some of it was true, but some of it wasn't quite factual. And I've read the book so many times, in fact, that the pages have fallen out. And I got to kind of resort the pages in order to do the pages right now because so many of them fallen out. But it was a very good book. I was riveted by it because I wanted to know if this was true. And I read it with the idea of whether it could be true. And the answer was yes, it could be true. But was it true? I don't know. Right? So if we had that communication with an alien species, or we grabbed a downed UFO and we took components and gave them to our people to research, what would that mean for Russia or China or any of our allies, in Canada? Would they want it too? And we, of course, wouldn't give it to them. We would never give it to them. So there's a whole host of problems associated with one country getting this kind of information versus all the countries getting this kind of information. And so that's why I'm not sure how that's happened and why an alien race would pick the United States over a different country. Why us? Why would they? I think it's because it's happening in a lot of countries. It's not just happening here, it's happening there and there and there. It's happening because we're being visited, I think, by more than one species. And again, if they're carbon based, our big blue beacon of our blue ball of oxygen beaming out into space was almost all bees. Big blue bouncing beaming ball of oxygen going out into space is a calling card that's announcing loudly, we are here, we are alive. And if you're carbon based, that's where you're going to go.
That's really amazing. All inspiring, and thank you so much. I don't know if you have any final words you'd like to say for people listening. Any final words you'd like to say?
Well, I think I just said it. you know, um, our atmosphere is our calling card, and it's going to be visible for thousands and thousands of light years away. And within those thousands of light years, we have found um, just over 5,000 potential planets, and that's just the beginning. There's more planets than stars in the universe, more planets than stars in our galaxy, which is 100 billion stars, the low end. So, life, I think, is boundless. I think there's a lot of life out there. I think the universe is built for life. And that's why I wrote my book, The Populated Universe. That's what it's about. It's my belief that that life in the universe is the rule, not the exception. And I think, given the chance, life will develop, and that it's very hard for it not to develop. Just look at the bottom of Lake Vostok. You know, look at the black smoker hydrosulfide vents down at the hydrothermal vents down in the Pacific Ocean. Also, look on the walls of craters, volcanic craters. Wow, there's bacteria lining those craters just above the lava where they're flourishing. See? So life flourishes amid the qualities that would extinguish it. And I think that's a very interesting feature of our planet. And we exist in spite of earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, fires, asteroid strikes. 98% of life died from a volcanic eruption during the Permian period 252 years ago. 98%. There's hardly anything left. That could kill up. That's a planet killer, that eruption. The ocean temperature rose by 21 degrees Celsius in just a few short months. All the oxygen, was leaving the water because of that. The hotter it gets, the less oxygen can be in the water. And many creatures died, including the plankton, which make oxygen. So it was a self-feeding, killing machine going on there. But it recovered, didn't it? And what happened was the creatures that were hardest hit back then were creatures that would become mammals like us. And the creatures that survived were creatures that were to become the dinosaurs. And when the Permian extinction occurred, that's when the age of the dinosaurs began. And if they hadn't been rendered extinct by that asteroid 65 million years ago, who knows where we'd be? Who knows if I wouldn't be talking to you in a different language, or have scales on my face, greenish skin, the yellow tail, who knows, right?
Thank you so much, Mark. It was really, really beautiful. And I deeply enjoyed it. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring. And thank you so much.
Oh, that's okay, Mara. Thank you so much. It was very nice to talk to you, actually.